A quick introduction about me. I'm Harish Nair. I lead the go-to-market tech strategy for Rubrik across Asia Pacific and Japan. And this team predominantly is responsible for, any kinds of M&As that we want to look at, any kind of product improvements, any new builds that we actually want to do, right? And this is one of the reasons why, Rubrik has also been considered as the best innovator in the market as well, especially from our space. Right. And at least for those who are not aware of Rubrik, I just wanted to give you a quick understanding for that as well. That we started off about 12 years, or yeah, we are a 12-year-old company right now. But if you look at how we've innovated over the years, right, it's only gotten better, and it's actually set the precedent for every other vendor in the market that this is the new ground zero, right? This is the new benchmark that actually has to be followed. And over the years, what we've only done is that we've turned ourselves to be the most cyber secure, cyber resilient company. And one of the things that we really take pride in is that, every customer of ours, we've got north about 7,000 plus customers, enterprise customers, right? We do have a fair bit of customers who've been victims of ransomware incidents as well, both day zero and targeted. And we're the only company that has had 100% success rate with every form of cyber incident that actually has happened, right? Now, in today's session, we are going to be focused a bit more on identity, right? But that's not all that we do, right? From an entire use case perspective, we do protect workloads that are in cloud, in SaaS, or on-prem as well. And identity, though in the previous slide, I did show that, we did start backing this up into 2017, but to call this out, that we had a shift in focus only because back in 2023, we had one of our customers that did get hit. It was a realization for us that, we didn't have to look at identity like just a database, right? We had to get into the depths of what identity is, how it behaves, and what needs to be done from a restoration standpoint. And that's what we actually wanted to, deep dive on, and how our focus literally shifted as well. And one thing I'll definitely call out is that why today enterprises they do hope that what they have today is formidable if it is good enough. But I'll actually walk you through scenarios with customers, basically customer scenarios again, which are public, right? I don't want to be sued later on, but just do want to call this out as well, right? That the preparedness that you may think that you have today may not be enough, because the experiences that we got from these same said customers who've been impacted, it was a real learning experience, and that's what we want to share with you today as well, right? And another key call out that I do want to make is that we are not trying to replace any of your security stacks, right? Which means that we are here to partner with them, right? Everything that we do, it's basically to enhance or enable your existing security stack as well. And in no form or manner are we ever going to say that we want to replace your existing stack, right? So this is also another thing that I didn't want to call out, because we did get a lot of questions around, hey, are we a security replacing company? But we are not, right? And another important thing is that when you look at our core capabilities, right? When you the biggest crux what we have is that as a Rubrik customer, the benefit that you end up getting is you're continuously being checked for any kind of known threats that are there in the world as well. But think of a use case wherein you do get hit, right? Just think of this unforeseen, scenario. The biggest challenge is that if you do get hit, you have a solution that actually can tell you what went wrong, where it went wrong, where to go back to the last known clean state, and get you back operational as quick as possible. That's who Rubrik is in short, right? Now, changing gears a bit, right? Why we say, resilience is kind of really important in every aspect. If I give you a complete broad spectrum of what we would want to deliver, and also from a perspective that what is actually required, right? So you have two major buckets. One is the preparedness, the other one is the cyber response and recovery. Now you'll notice that, when you even, talk about getting my minimum viable company up or minimum viable business up, right? You'll notice that what are the core requirements that you think you should be prepared with, right? Both from a posture perspective, right? From a risk mitigation standpoint as well. And most importantly, if you do get hit, how do you identify which is the clean state? Because this is now becoming a big, testament as well, because, one of the customers who we spoke to who was down for almost 6 weeks, right? One of the incidents that they narrated to us was that, I had my database with me, I tried bringing it up, but every time that I did, the attacker came back again. So imagine that 6 weeks, what ended up happening was that because they did not know a clean point in time, they went back saying 3 days, 7 days, 14, 28, and they finally picked a copy which was almost a month old. But every time it was a rinse and repeat. It's not easy, especially when you're trying to rebuild this in a in a clean room or an IRE environment as well. So in Crux, this is what we're going to delve into a bit more, that, you need to have basically a solution that not only caters to data, but also to identity as well. And if you have them in a single pane of glass, that actually would really help, because now you don't need to, have dependencies with different kinds of tools out there. You can actually have a single solution that can deliver all of it. Right? Now let's get into the identity landscape, right? So in most cases, right? Now think of AD, this is more like a 25, 30-year old, product out there. It's not changed much, it's not evolved much besides it moving from operating system standpoint. But when you look at it, right, every organization in some form or manner has, is continuing to use AD as well. Though back in the day, it was only meant for those kind of systems, those kind of entities that was, that required Kerberos-based authentication. But times have changed, right? Every enterprise has gone towards starting to adopt cloud and SaaS-based applications as well. So, which is why it's more important that you end up having a hybrid use case wherein your AD may get synced to either an Entra or to Okta as well. And from there, you actually get access to your cloud and SaaS-based applications. So, majority of the industry today is in the current state framework as well. And while we do see select customers at least, which are in the future state, right? Wherein they actually don't use any, product out there. They actually have a homegrown product, or they actually are completely SaaS based as well. But that again is a very small portion of what we've seen. And the challenging part here is that it's not easy to move out of these solutions, right? And we're not advocating for that as well. But the thing is that, these are sticky solutions, which means that you'll continue to be on them for quite some time. Though Microsoft has its own, perspective that they would eventually want to have all customers move to Entra and kind of get rid of AD as well. But I would imagine that most of your estate, there would be at least some legacy applications that may still depend on that as well, right? Now, so in today's series, what we're going to talk about a bit more is on current state, right? And how do we want to address this? What are the challenges that we are seeing, and how do we want to address that as well, right? So I think this is something which is quite evident, right? Everybody would be seeing this in the news as well. The number of attacks that are growing, and identity-based attacks have only grown over the last 2 years, right? Now, I know I'm calling out a few names, but again, these are recorded, so these are already on the news. So I'm not, and I don't want to be sued again. So think of the companies that you probably would have heard of, right? You think of M&S, you think of JLR, think of Caesars, MGM, right? Colonial Pipeline, think of the SolarWinds or Yahoo. All of these companies, they actually had an identity-based attack, and these were known in the market, right? But the challenging part here is that, why is it that attackers are going after identity? Because when you look at it from back in the day perspective, right? Attackers, what they used to do is that they used to somehow gain access into the customer's, infrastructure, either through an insider or, from brute force or any other format that they could think of. And once they get in, their objective would be to basically, get access to as much data as possible. If they do get lucky, exfiltrate that and hold you for double extortion. And that was a bit of a painful process, right? Because the dwell time that an attacker requires is a lot more. So which means that it takes a lot of time and effort, basically a group of actors to actually come in and start doing all of this, have this havoc, right? But with identity, it's a bit different. With identity, all it takes is, if I'm able to cut you off from your own data set, that's all that's required, right? So think of this use case that I may have a phone right now, but if just think of the use case that if my Face ID doesn't work, if my passcode doesn't work, if my Apple ID username, sorry, my password doesn't work. In that state, I do have access to my data per se, but I can't access it as well. So that's the kind of dilemma that we are in right now, and attackers have understood this as well. Now, think of some of the customer names that I've mentioned a while back, right? The biggest challenge was when AD and Entra both were compromised. That immediately trickled down to their communication channels as well, which is this Microsoft 365. So think of it this way, right? Without identity, there is no communication channel. So which is why, some of the customers had to take an immediate subscription for a Gmail or some out of band communication channel, only so that they could communicate internally, at least with their most critical stakeholders, in terms of how to navigate through this as well. So that's the kind of challenge that we also foresee as well. And with this, attackers do see this as a good segue, right? That if they are able to, take over the entire tenant, for example, it could be on Azure, AWS, GCP, whichever that you're running. Imagine that all it takes is to cut you off from your own tenant, and that's it. It becomes an account level takeover. Now, in these kind of scenarios, it becomes much more difficult because now you're dependent on, either the hyperscaler to legally get you back your own tenant back, but by then we don't know the amount of attack or the amount of damage that the attacker would have done, right? So this is another big thing, and which is why today when you see identity is the keys to the kingdom, right? So no matter what, if you do get a hack, do get a breach, or if it's targeted or day zero or anything from that standpoint, right? Once they get hit, it basically is able to cripple your entire organization, and you've seen numbers around this as well, right? So one of those companies I think lost about 2 billion, pounds, and basically the government had to step in to basically start funding the manufacturers as well. Now, if we take a step back, right, now that we understand that what attackers are going after, the second thing would be is that how prepared we would be, right? Now, in most cases, we did ask some of our customers as well, asking them saying that how prepared are you today from any kind of attack scenario, right? So we did get some positive responses that we are completely locked down, right? We have a complete passwordless approach. We actually don't support any kind of BYOD in the environment as well, XDRs, MFA, so on and so forth. But our question was more around if you do, in unforeseen situations, you do get breached. Let's talk about a scenario that because we live in a time and world which is assumed breach, right? Let's assume that you've already been compromised. Let's assume that there is an identity, that is compromised by a bad actor out there. Now, what's your next approach? Now, think of this use case that if I can't trust my entire Active Directory forest, if I can't trust my Entra ID tenant, which means that you don't even know the attacker has access to what, and this may result in this uncertainty that maybe this actor has access to everything, which also means that I may have to go back to ground zero and actually start restoring everything rather than figuring out what actually went wrong. And again, this may come out as a joke, but some of the responses that we did get from our customers was this, right? That if in worst cases worse, you do get hit and there's nothing that you could do, and the only other option was for you to rebuild. These were the answers that we actually got. And again, right, in all fairness, this is honestly not what everybody had thought of in the past, right? Because it was much easier back then because you already could have built a lot of firewalls around your data, which protects your data. But identity was not protected as well, right? And further down, what I'm also going to talk about is that how even your existing ITDR solutions, right, where they may actually have challenge, at least from a cyber incident perspective as well. And when you look at it, why this industry is in this kind of a scenario is only because think of this use case, right? Every organization today is spending on prevention, which means that you would want to invest a lot in terms of building walls around your data, ensuring that there's enough, guardrails in place that actually prevents an attack from happening, right? But look at the other way around. When an attack happens, right, or when you're not prepared for it, at least if it's already been breached, now the recovery becomes a bit of a heartache because usually these are not tried and tested. Though a DR is something that you may have, you may be testing out drills, whatnot, but from an identity perspective, it's actually not as easy, right? And these learnings is what we got over the last 2 years, wherein we understood how complex this actually could get. Now let's put into a bit of perspective, right? That if, for example, how traditionally what everybody looks at it from identity standpoint is that yes, you have your domain controllers built, right? You most likely may have another point solution out there or a native solution, which basically takes database backups, maybe stores it in another Samba share, or maybe another backup solution comes into play and gives that Samba share to keep your backups immutable, right? But this is pretty much it, right? Because when you look at an attack actually propagating and now you actually have to start doing the recovery, look at the dependency that you actually have across, multiple solutions out there. But what if those solutions are already down during the cyber incident? So now this becomes a much more bigger challenge, right? Now that even if you wanted to do a restore, you may not be able to do it because of, the dependencies that you have across various tools as well. Now, think of it architecturally, right? What are, how is your forest basically built? It's nothing but, let's say a logical construct of your multiple domains that you may have, right? But end of the day, it is basically spread across physical assets called as domain controllers. Now, we had a couple of customers who told us that I think I'm good, right? Because I have domain controllers not just in on-prem, but in my DR site, in my off-site, completely cut off air gap location, which does a delayed sync. I've got domain controllers sitting in Azure, AWS, GCP. But when you look at it architecturally, right, it's just one database. It's one database that gets synced across all of these locations. So, which is why it's much more important to understand that it's not from a breadth of, how big your estate is. It's not about, how many domain controllers that you have from a redundancy standpoint. It's about if you do get hit or compromised, right? Even a single identity, that identity does get synced across all of your other DCs as well, and that is how attackers gain access or gain lateral movement. So which is why it becomes really, really important for us to, understand that, how a compromise could happen. And if that happens, how easily it actually propagates across all the other estate of all the other domain controllers of yours, and how it easily, trickles down. Now, another feedback that we got from customers was that in most cases when they got attacked, right, they didn't even realize that they were getting attacked. This is another interesting thing, right? Because what they told us was that they experienced a bit of slowness. Yes, they felt that there was no compromise done on a privileged user or account, but still they didn't realize that the attacker was moving it laterally into the environment. They were trying to get foothold of a domain controller, trying to see or get hold of a privileged account, or even find a machine that is domain joint which they could compromise on. So these kind of things usually go unnoticed because none of your solutions from a security stack perspective is able to track all of these movements, right, continuously, right? It's usually staggered, saying that I either look at a compromised credential, or I look at lateral movement, or I look at some kind of compromise happening at a data layer. But the holistic approach is something that's really, really missing. Now, think of the other challenge that we've seen. Today, if you are using Active Directory, be that on-prem or in cloud, one thing that you'll realize is that it's always going to run on Windows. You cannot change the operating system. Unlike any other application that you may have, now you're dependent on an OS that is forever having vulnerabilities, right? And truth be told, when you even ask any of your AI chatbots, right, that which is the most vulnerable OS that you can think of, besides open source, you actually see Windows being the top as well. And this is going to continue happening as well, right? Now, the challenge is that even Microsoft, when they respond, they do call this out very fairly that, see, it's not that we are not doing the best that we can. There's a lot of protection that's going around it, but there's a lot of estate that the customer would also have to protect, which means that the AD and the hardware layer, which is your domain controller, also has to be protected, secured in every form and manner as well. Now, you may assume that this is only an AD problem, maybe not an Entra problem, but that's not true as well. The most recent vulnerability that happened in September, imagine, right? This attack vector was so huge, this vulnerability was so huge that if an attacker really wanted to come into your environment, they could have. They literally could have gotten these, think of it like God keys, right? They literally could go into any account, get into that particular account without any blockage as well. And they could have literally had all accounts taken over. Now, thankfully, this was addressed in time, but just letting you know that there were very few customers who did get compromised as part of this as well. So besides vulnerabilities, now think of the other use case. There are other attack vectors that we're seeing these days as well, right? One of which was kind of puzzling for us as well, that while you may have AD Entra, now think of it, right? You're actually syncing your AD to Entra, right? Which means that you basically have an entity in between that syncs your content from A to B. Now, the new attack vector is that, and if an attacker cannot breach in or break into your AD or Entra, and if they're able to break into your Connect server, what they can do is that they can force duplicate entries to Entra, which means that they can break your Entra by confusing it that I have multiple entries for the same user. Now, this is another challenge that we're seeing. And the conglomerate who actually got hit by this in Asia itself, what they told us is that because the attack was done in such a manner, they literally had to recreate everything. And the worst part was the time that they had to go back to, right? For example, they had to take, I think, a 2 or 3 month old copy to go back to. But the worst part was that because they could not get the updated changes of, every identity that was out there, they had to go into their service now, look at every request that had come for their, 50,000 users. They had to basically manually edit them. So this turned out to be a much longer stint as well. Though the attack was meant for disrupting the environment. Even after the environment was brought back up, the customer could not go into an full operational scale because their accesses were still not fully back as well. So fundamentally, these are the kind of challenges that we are seeing as well. Now, again, we are not trying to say that Microsoft is not doing its job, right? Because Microsoft themselves are an investor in Rubrik. This is a known fact as well. So it's not that they themselves have a vested interest in us. So, but the fact of the matter here is that even when you look at their own defense report, right? If Microsoft today is basically preventing 600 million identity-based attacks on a daily basis, right? You can really say that they're doing the best that they can. And these stats are only going to keep getting higher and higher as well, only because attackers are much using a much more easier way of actually getting this deployed, getting this basically tricking users to actually, think of it from an MFA fatigue standpoint, from, password resets as well. Now, the most recent manufacturing company, imagine it was a third party, user that was compromised. And once they got into the environment, all they did is that they forced a couple of privileged users to reset their passwords. Now, some of them were naive enough to accept that and get it reset, and that's all that it took for the attacker to come in. Right. So these are the kind of challenges that we have today in the industry. Now, if worst case is worse, right? If we talk about a scenario that you did get hit, you want to do a recovery. Now let's look at what the realistic process today is, right? There's a concept in Microsoft itself wherein if you end up having an incident and you want to do a complete recovery, right? Microsoft has a documentation which is about 150 pages, about 28, 29 sequential steps as well. But the worst part is that it has a failure rate of 80%, which means that if even if you have the best of expertise, the best of people for managing it as well, you need to have the right talent, and even with that, you're also talking about the challenge that it is going to keep getting. Your failure rate is only going to keep getting higher as well. It's only because the details that you have to go through is kind of cumbersome. Now, what we did is that we went to one of our customers, we asked them saying that, what is the steps that you actually follow? And what they came back with is this, right? So all we had to do was basically give a database, and what the customer had to do from a rebuild perspective was these steps. Now, this is only from a rebuild perspective. We've not even gone to the scenario wherein you've identified a clean copy. We're talking about is just the recovery process. So what Rubrik thought of is that first, let's solve the problem, in a three-pronged approach. One is, can we basically orchestrate all of these steps for you in a manner in such a way that you may not need that expertise during the time of an event, which means that any infra admin available is able to basically get an entire forest recovery done for you, right, in a matter of 5 steps. That's the first automation orchestration that we thought about, right? And yes, this is backed by Microsoft. This is vetted by Microsoft, and they themselves consume us for that as well, right? The other important thing is that we've not bypassed any of the steps that were actually mentioned in their own documentation, which means that we've not short circuited anything. We've not cut short anything saying that this is something that we want to ignore. Everything in the manner that they've asked us for is what we've actually, kind of structured this as well. So that's how we wanted to make sure from an automation perspective. But truth be told, it wasn't good enough, right? Because we want to be a solution that actually helps the customer from a cyber scenario as well, not just from an operational recovery perspective. So, which is why what Rubrik thought of was that we wanted to take a multi-pronged approach. Now, what I mean by this is that in Rubrik lens standpoint, we looked at it from a three-pillar perspective. One is rebuild. Now, what I mean by rebuild is that if ever there was a situation wherein you had to do a complete restart, right? Could be a cyber incident, could be an incident wherein you can't trust your forest anymore, could be an insider attack, could be a complete, an AI going rogue and doing stuff. So all we're talking about is a scenario wherein a rebuild has to be done. We will orchestrate that process for you. But from an extent perspective, what we also realized was that if we continue to think of identity from a data protection company standpoint, right, this is never going to work. So, which is why we actually had to change hats. We had to look at identity as an identity, both human and non-human, and kind of track it as well. Now, imagine how Rubrik does, tracking for data, right? We actually look at data, we see how is it evolving, how is it changing, the heuristics for it, the behavior for it, and we then give you an assessment saying that yes, this data is either being tampered with, compromised, or otherwise, right? Now we have that, we wanted to bring that same capability for identities as well. We wanted to get into a space wherein we wanted to look at how your identities are changing. How are they behaving? Is it changing, changing in a different manner? Is it evolving? Is it, growing laterally in any form or manner? And this is how we wanted to basically bring in two other aspects. One is a harden, and the other one is a continuous monitoring aspect as well, right? So think of the extension, right? Now I'm going to start from rebuild and go back to the source. Now, what we do with rebuild is that we are literally, like I mentioned, orchestrating the entire recovery, which means that the same 29 steps process, we automating this into a 5-step wizard, right? And like I mentioned, it's operationally simple. Any infra admin available is able to get this done and get a forest operational, probably in your IRE setup, right? And then any health checks that need to be done is also done by Rubrik for you as well, but with a couple of add-ons as well, right? Think of this use case that it's not just AD. Now you have your interconnecting components as well, like your AD or Entra Connect. You have your PKI, ADCS. All these services are also part of the Rubrik purview as well, which means that we protect them, we restore them, and then it finally goes back to Entra ID, and we go ahead and start restoring your Entra ID as well to the same state. For example, if you pick the date from 2 days ago, we are able to roll back all of the changes done to 2 days ago to your Entra as well, right? So you get a complete hybrid recovery use case using a single pane of glass across every workload that we do, so across AD and Entra as well. And in case you're using Okta, we do support that in a similar front as well, right? Now, operationally, think of how we do it, right? Doesn't matter if you have a single forest, multi-domain, single forest, single domain, multi-forest, multi-domain. Just think of this use case. If we come in and we actually want to do an entire recovery, all these steps that you see are fully automated by Rubrik. There's no intervention as such required, right? The moment you give us a target to restore it to, we'll start getting everything back and we'll get your forest back operational. That's the most important call out, right? But let's get to the other meteor part, right? Like we mentioned that first having the recovery done, making it faster, that's one use case. But helping you identify the clean state, it becomes really, really important because think of this the same scenario that I spoke about a while ago, right? That a customer who did not know where to go back to from a clean state perspective had to do a rinse and repeat each time, which means that they had to go pick a particular point in time, say that I want to do a recovery from this, hope that it's clean. But if it's not, you have to basically start all over again. So that kind of process, right, is going to get a lot more tedious. So which is why we literally had to get into the depths of identities to understand how are they configured, right? How is the posture defined for every identity of yours? And yes, still from a data protection standpoint, because we want to not just protect your data, which is your database, like your NTDS database, we're also talking about the logical aspect, which are your objects, like your users, roles, groups, so on and so forth, right? All of them, how they're configured. The second thing what we had to do was we had to go after global frameworks. We literally went after, I think, the seven or the top eight global frameworks out there. Like think of OWASP, MITRE, NIST, so on and so forth. And we looked at every attack vector that we've seen from an identity standpoint, and anything that these frameworks define as, something that is not a good posture, right? And why we do this is because while we take backups of yours, we want to continuously keep letting you know how your posture for your identity is so that you're prepared. You're taking the risk of keeping your posture for that particular identity in a certain manner, but we want to make you aware of that. It should not be the other case wherein you're not aware of it and something bad were to happen. And why you're doing this is only because we want to stop, before the lateral movement starts. Now, a simple example for that is that imagine somebody has access to an account which may not be privileged, but somebody who's trying to get access into your privileged account, that becomes a challenge. So we were trying to see if we can stop that lateral movement. So one example I can think of is think of a nested group, right? For example, you may be part of multiple groups. So if you are compromised, you can always understand that using your access, the person can get into these multiple groups and get access to multiple other, applications and so on and so forth as well, right? So that's the thing that we wanted to basically, get at. And worst case, right? If everything goes down and it's a point wherein it's a day zero incident and everything gets compromised, like think of it like a scattered spider or something around those lines. If you do happen to have that kind of an incident, now you talk about a complete rollback. So from Rubrik standpoint, the capabilities that we wanted to come up with is that first, while we back up your data sets, we want to do a continuous risk monitoring for every human and non-human identity of yours, both for AD and Entra, right? And we wanted to also make sure that we continuously help you improve your posture because it's like a risk mitigation, right? If we know that there is a configuration out there that's not correctly set, and there are frameworks out there that are kind of attesting to that this is not a good enough one. So in that particular case, we want to help you improve that. The second thing is that now this is where you may think that this is kind of coinciding with your ITDR solution. I'll come to that as well. Now, why we are looking at it from a real-time basis is only because we wanted to basically understand that if there is an event that happens, right, and if it is big enough, which you need to be notified for, Rubrik wants to be the one to notify this to you as well. And yes, while your ITDR solution may pick it up as well, we're talking about a doomsday scenario when everything is down. In that case, we're talking about every security product of yours as well that may not have the visibility that it needed for basically giving you any insights. And that's also one of the reasons why all these security vendors have actually partnered with. And I'll give you one such example later on, that why they ended up partnering with us as well. But our reasoning for getting into this space is only because not only are we tracking, the events, changes, everything from a backup perspective, we are doing a live tracking of the events that are happening within your identity space as well, so that in case you want to do a corrective surgical action, you can do this immediately with Rubrik, right? In a much more, I think, simpler way as well, because you know that event shows up with Rubrik and you're able to quickly remediate that. And worst cases worse, again, like if there's no way to contain it and the incident has become big enough wherein you don't have a forest that you can trust, you don't have Entra that you can trust. Now you talk about a complete recovery, which we automate that for you as well, right from your AD and all the way to your Entra as well. Okay? Now, holistically, this is how the UI of us looks. It's a quick dashboard, and yes, this is executive friendly, which means that we, in the majority of our customers, we've got about 3,000 plus customers who only use our identity based protection. And imagine that the execs get a complete view around how are they holistically, looking at from a posture perspective, and they get to call out saying that, hey, there are identities out there that I see are risky out there. Why we continue to keep that as well? Okay? Now, if I change gears a bit, right? Anybody who's here a CrowdStrike user or defender as well. So these are, you have ITDR solutions as such as well. But one of the callouts that I did want to make, and the earlier statement that I did make, right? We are not trying to compete with your existing ITDR solution. We are trying to complement them. Now, what I mean by this is that imagine a use case wherein, say, for example, you are using CrowdStrike ITDR, right? The challenge is that CrowdStrike it does its job really really well from detecting any kind of changes that are happening to identities based on its own policies. It's able to detect threats and it's able to contain that threat by basically blocking that identity. But the one thing that CrowdStrike, Defender, or any other ITD solution that it can't do is that it cannot help you remediate that, which means that it cannot tell you what exactly was done before the identity was blocked. For example, you have a user called Peter Parker, right? If CrowdStrike notices that Peter Parker has done something, malicious or bad or something around its lines, it goes in and says that I have gone ahead and blocked it because it did something, which isn't right. But CrowdStrike, its job ends there. It cannot tell you that, okay, this Peter Parker has gone ahead and basically modified 10 different user accesses. It went ahead and modified 50 different objects. It went ahead and modified 100 different attributes. None of it is something that is visible to an ITDR solution. So what CrowdStrike did is that they went and they partnered with us saying that, see, while you're able to give a complete risk over time metric because we back up data day in, day out. So we have a complete visibility for it as well. So what CrowdStrike told us is that let's do one thing. Let's integrate it in such a manner that I'll be the ones that calls out for any kind of event. If I see an event, I'm immediately going to tell this to Rubrik, and Rubrik will help customers with selective actions, right? One would be a rollback, a revert, or remediate, or a contain as well. And that's how we stitch the story. Now, this is why we have this end-to-end program going on with CrowdStrike as well. And in case you're not a CrowdStrike customer, you're going into something like in Microsoft Defender, that same capability is going to get rolled out by the end of Q1 for us. And again, it's only because we want to complement these kind of solutions as well. And the objective for this is mainly this, right? We want to reduce the entire attack time frame as well. For example, if even if it is a surgical attack wherein only maybe one, two of couple of users have been compromised, you know exactly what you can pick, what you can do and have a complete rollback for as well, right? So that's the whole holistic picture that we had in terms of seeing it end to end. Yeah. So I think that's pretty much what I had from an entire use case perspective. So we'll take a quick pause here. Is there any questions that we can help address?